Swinson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would certainly like to add the support of the Liberal Democrats to this bill, and indeed I'm pleased that there seems to be a cross-party consensus that this is the right way forward for the government to go. I don't think I will require to detain the House for 3/4 of an hour in order to put the views across and the few questions that I hope the Minister will be able to address in her summing up. I'd like to start just by echoing the commendation that the Minister and indeed the Honourable Gentleman for Aylesbury have made of the British Red Cross and the service that it has given already in the more than 100 years that it has been operating. And it's quite wonderful to see such an institution with such a long and successful history, and indeed the ICRC with an even longer history of nearly 150 years, doing incredibly important work. Obviously, the need to protect medical workers and respect the International Federation wherever they are operating is absolutely universal, and I'm sure nobody would disagree with the requirement to do so. I have to say, you learn something new every day, so the adage goes, and I certainly found when reading the Lord's Hansard of this debate, and as outlined by the Minister in her remarks as well, the origin of the Red Cross itself, which I was surprised to learn was actually a reversal of the Swiss flag in a symbol of the neutrality of Switzerland. I think it's interesting and important to remember that, in fact, although it is called the Red Cross, it's not actually a religious symbol, although sadly has been taken to mean that in some circumstances. And obviously the potential difficulties that have happened with the Red Cross and the Red Crescent being perceived as symbols which do not seem to be regarded as neutral has led to the requirement of a new symbol being adopted. And of course the adoption of the red crystal seems to be a sensible way forward in such sensitive areas, even though it is sad that this choice may have to be made in some areas. I do very much welcome the Minister's confirmation that the default option for the FCO's point of view, and I'm sure and I hope it will be the same for the British Red Cross as well, will be to continue to use the Red Cross. Obviously that is what is most familiar within this country. It's got the brand recognition, and it's absolutely right that that should be the first and foremost symbol used. But I think it is important that the flexibility exists in circumstances where it's required that a crystal can be used instead, and as has already been discussed in the debate, can be used alongside symbols which are used in a particular country to make sure that it's absolutely clear that the humanitarian and the medical aid is what's being delivered and it is neutral. I'll certainly give way.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Lady. Could she help me? Where she says in the context of her comments a minute or two ago, what circumstances would she envisage that the red crystal could be used instead of the Red Cross?
My understanding is that on several occasions it has already been used instead of the Red Cross in circumstances in war zones where it has been felt that either the Red Cross or the Red Crescent might have been perceived as religious symbols rather than neutral medical symbols. And I think that if that is the case, regrettable though that is, it is entirely sensible for us to make sure that we have an alternative symbol that can be used. And there's been some discussion about who should make that decision, and clearly it's something which the Minister has already set out. The default will be the Red Cross, but that is a decision that clearly has to be made by the people on the ground who are able to properly assess the situation and any sensitivities. Turning to Clause 2 of the bill, which is calling for additional protection for those who are doing vital and dangerous work. And again, as has been rightly said, these people are doing an incredibly difficult job. They're courageous in doing so, and we should salute the service that they provide us, and indeed they provide the whole international community with. This legal protection for these UN personnel doing the peace building and emergency humanitarian work is long overdue, and unfortunately is more needed than ever, given the deliberate targeting of humanitarian personnel and UN personnel that we have seen in recent conflicts. I did want to just ask for a point of clarity from the Minister on one issue which has been raised today and also raised in the other place. My noble friend Baroness Northover said that the sister organisations, such as the World Health Organisation or the Food and Agricultural Organisation, if they were having missions in conflict areas, would they or would they not be included? Now, in my reading of the ministers summing up in the other place, the suggestion was that any UN agency would be included, and any agency undertaking work with the UN under that umbrella would be included, but not humanitarian agencies. However, the Honourable Gentleman for Aylesbury suggested that the WHO and FAO would not be included. So I think that clarity from the Minister in her summing up would be very helpful indeed. I will say.
I agree with a lot of what the Honourable Lady is saying. Does she think that sufficient sanctions have been in place historically against those who have abused the Red Cross, or indeed, most recently, the United Nations Works and Relief Agency in Gaza? And what does she think can be done to actually beef up that beyond what's in this bill?
Well, I would certainly agree that there has not been effective enough sanctions, and indeed I was just going to come on to it. It's all very well passing a bill, but if the protection is there but isn't actually acted on, then it's words rather than actions. I think what I would say is that it's important that the legislation is in order and is there as the first step, but the international community then needs to have the will, the political will, to act in cases where there has been a breach. And certainly, I think in the recent circumstances in Gaza, where the UN gave all of the coordinates of their facilities to the Israeli authorities and they still ended up being bombed, that clearly needs international investigation. Now, the difficulty that you then get through organisations like the UN is whether or not such proper independent investigations will be subject to a veto. But I very strongly feel that in such circumstances where there's potential evidence that war crimes may have occurred, that those should be investigated and people must be held to account, regardless of what country they're from, or indeed what country the offences are committed in. And yeah, I mean, this legal protection doesn't solve the problem, but I think at least having it on the statute book does help to provide a deterrent and does give us the tools to pursue justice, but the political will does need to be there to pursue that justice.
Will the Lady give way?
I will give way.
I'm grateful for the give way, but surely if a deterrent is going to be effective, there's got to be an effective sanction when there is non-compliance. And aren't we in danger of engaging again in gesture politics, where the substance is not actually going to follow what we are saying is happening today?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman will know that getting agreement in international organisations is not easy. It's an art rather than a science. In passing this legislation today, I very much hope that this will send a message to other countries and encourage other countries to ratify these protocols as well. But that does not obviously mean that automatically the international organisations will work as perfectly as we would want them to do so. But that's not an argument for not passing this, not giving the bill its second reading today, or indeed for this government not bringing forward the legislation. I think if the government is, as I hope it will, be encouraging other countries to sign and to ratify these protocols and indeed the initial convention, then it's got a bit of a difficult case to do so if it hasn't actually ratified it itself. I mean, obviously, when we talk about the protection of UN personnel in this bill, we're talking about the protection of UN personnel within the UK, where we would certainly hope that there would not be problems that this bill would need to apply to. But it's the message that this Parliament is sending and giving us the basis on which to be able to, through our diplomatic efforts, encourage other countries to sign and to ratify. So I hope the Minister might also be able to inform the House of the current update of the countries. I understand 87 had ratified the original convention, but of the protocols, 34 had signed and 16 had ratified, were the figures that were given in the other place in January. Obviously, 2 months on, it would be interesting to know if those figures have increased at all, and indeed what the number of ratifications that is needed for the protocols to come into force and how far away we are from that. I also would like to ask the Minister, in terms of the timescale of bringing this forward. I mean, as she said, it was signed by this government in 2005, and 4 years later, we're actually getting the legislation through. It's not exactly the most weighty piece of legislation that the government has needed to find parliamentary time for. So I find it a little bit difficult to understand why it has taken so long for the government to find that parliamentary time, and particularly given that the red crystal has actually been in use since 2007, it really would have been helpful for the House to be able to have this in order before that happened. And I hope the Minister might be able to just outline what the difficulties were. Another point I just wanted to raise in terms of clarification is a letter that was written by the Noble Lord Malloch Brown to my colleague and noble friend Lord Wallace, which seemed to suggest that even when states had failed, that international courts might be able to uphold this law. And I really just wanted to press the Minister on how that could be the case if the states in question hadn't actually ratified the protocols by that stage. Clearly, some of the states that we most want to ratify these protocols are the type of states where it may not be top of their agenda, and so any information on the government's efforts to encourage them would also be very welcome. Finally, much as I welcome this additional legal protection for UN personnel, I think we do need to remember that the NGOs, Oxfam, Médecins Sans Frontières, Save the Children and so on, there's other humanitarian agencies delivering aid and relief efforts, and these people will not be protected, and a lot of these people are working in conflict zones where even the UN has pulled out and has deemed it too dangerous to work. So I hope at some point the government might pursue legal protection in the future for this group of aid workers who again are doing so in a neutral capacity, purely providing humanitarian assistance, not actually getting involved in the politics of individual countries. And of course we saw just on the 11th of March 3 staff kidnapped from Médecins Sans Frontières in Darfur, which I'm sure the whole House would hope are safely returned. Obviously, attacks against humanitarian workers can never be justified, but we should be concerned that our valued international institutions are sometimes regarded with hostility in various parts of the world, and it's incumbent on all of us, and particularly the government, to do everything possible to uphold the United Nations and their partners as just and non-partisan. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope the Minister will be able to address the points that I've raised in her summing up, and I certainly will be delighted to support the second reading of this bill.